our first time meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
This is my second time in Austin. Super excited about the Texas
amazing, yeah.
ecosystem and what's happening. I'd love to just talk a little bit about that.
You know, the state of Texas, when it comes to entrepreneurship, is unparalleled. There's the energy, the vibe, the education system at the university level in particular, just the mission of, you know, young kids in particular that come here just looking to change their lives, the world, you know, start companies. It's just amazing. I mean, I got here when I was 24, started my first company when I was 25 after I'd gotten fired a few times, and, you know, whatever it takes, right? And from there, just been able to grow and watch other companies grow and invest in them. It's just, you know, it's just really, really exciting.
Yeah. Well, I don't, so ARPA-H, so the ARPA for Health. So for those of you who have not heard of ARPA-H, you might have heard of DARPA. If you haven't heard of DARPA, for sure you've heard of the internet. And but a lot of people don't know that early investing in the internet and stealth technology started with DARPA. It was some key seed investments to help really launch those technologies.
The whole internet, yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't forever funders, but really, you know, what is the proof of concept that we need to have to get at? And so for us, we've been around for a year and a half, and we're here to do that for health. But part of one of the major differences for ARPA-H from DARPA is DARPA has a Department of Defense to be that advanced developer. For health, that's not Health and Human Services.
Right.
It's states, it's private sector. And so we actually launched a nationwide competition of where should we open ARPA-H offices that we could really help get closer to our patients, but also to our investor community. And that nationwide competition, Cambridge, Massachusetts won our Investor Catalyst Hub, and Dallas, Texas won our Customer Experience Hub. And so it's really getting us closer.
One hub out of two, we should have gotten both, but that's okay. No, but it's great. You know, reading up on what you guys are doing with ARPA, the fact that you are able to work in that same mindset as DARPA way back in the day and take moonshots. That's the difference, right? Because what's cool about the projects that they do is, you know, when I invest, it's like it is on Shark Tank to a certain extent. You know, what's your valuation? What's your cash flow going to be? You know, where are we going to be in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years? What's your moat and all that? You guys are just like, what's just going to change everything and screw things up, right? Which is amazing. I mean, because most traditional investors can't do that. Right. Now, you know, there's a part of me that says, well, it's the government that can't do it right, but you know, there's in this particular case, it's needed because you're not looking for the best financial model, you're looking for the greatest impact model. Right. So if you could talk, you know, what type of impacts you guys have seen and where you're going to go. Yeah,
so our mission is just period to accelerate better health outcomes for everyone. And so that doesn't mean that we're primarily focused on financial sustainability, but it is an important back end of it. What we want to do is actually change outcomes across a number of diseases using a number of technologies. We're disease agnostic, but our investments are ultra focused. We hire program managers who have defined a very clear problem that they want to solve. I'll give you an example. Our first program, called Nitro, is focused on what if joints could heal themselves? What are the investments we need to make in the next 5 years?
As someone who's had their hips replaced?
Right, well, exactly. So the program manager is a surgeon and said, okay, I'll do the math. Maybe I could help 3,000, 4,000 people in a very productive surgery career, or I could look for a needle-based injectable where I could take bone and cartilage cells and actually reverse osteoarthritis and rebuild joints. And so you don't need to go forward with a hip or knee replacement. And so those are the moonshots that we're really going after. I think another one that really speaks to the public and an example of the types of things that we're willing to go into, our THEA program is really focused on whole eye transplantation. And so that's not only being able to stabilize an eye, so they tend to lose viability very quickly, but reattach it to the optic nerve and restore sight. So
that's insane.
That's very challenging, but really breaking that problem down like that. And you start with, that's insane. You might get left at the stage.
That's okay.
But our program manager there said, okay, well, let's break this down into the problems that we can solve on a month by month, year by year basis. So in 5 years, we can actually have a patient that we can.
So you guys only started a year and a half ago. So it's not like eyeballs are being transplanted tomorrow, right? What type of time frame when you look at those things? And when a program, we'll we'll start with that.
Yeah. So we will invest in things that are very early stage or late stage. It's regardless. But what we're trying to do is, what is the blocker out there in the community that we need to overcome? And so for this THEA program, it really is that optic nerve reintegration. And so we have set a 5-year time horizon to be able to do that.
So, okay, well, that brings up an interesting question, like, because for a traditional entrepreneur, you want to see what your total addressable market is. I mean, it's probably not huge, so that's different. But you also want to know about your product market fit, right? Like, when are you going to be able to get and release your product? So when you say 5 years, that's proof of concept. What happens then? So somebody walks out, we see headlines, first eye transplant with optic nerve completion, right? Whatever they call it. What happens then?
So actually, even before we start a program, we have a whole office that's focused on what happens then, right? So we don't want to have that conversation.
So you are the government, because only a government would have a whole office about what happens if this moonshot hits, right?
But we move really quickly. So what we've done, it's called PATIO. It's this Transition Accelerator. And the whole point is for this program manager who wants to do a whole eye transplantation, like, what is the total addressable market? Who are the other players in this ecosystem? And what have private equity VCs said is the blocker that needs to be overcome for them to pick it up and invest on the other side? So we've identified those gaps, and those are built into the program. And we keep those investors close. And those patient communities close, because we want them to enthusiastically adopt our tools, so that at the last day of a program, it's not a cliff that they're falling off of, but instead they're transitioning smoothly into the
Okay, so
into the
talk
real
about
world.
that transition, because this is where I'll get political,
Okay.
right? Because being in the healthcare industry now with costplusdrugs.com, you know, we hear a lot about margin rights and NIH developing drugs, and then they're being picked up for commercialization without taxpayers being reimbursed or anything. So what is that process of going from completion to, okay, now there's 50 VCs or 3 VCs, whatever it may be, who are interested. You know, what happens next after that day?
Yeah, so part of it has to do with even how we stand up our programs and how we negotiate our contracts. And so we actually have, through our statute, through Congress, it's called, there's a little jargon, but other transactions authority, which means that we can actually work beyond buy dole. We can set up terms in our contracts to be favorable for the government and for those other sectors. So we can be much more creative in our incentives and the terms and conditions to ensure that we can transition out.
Though?
So,
Not to put you on the spot,
like one example, no, but like one example could be, I have the authority to directly reimburse FDA. And so for a drug company, it might actually be really interesting to them to get a priority, and this is, I'm being speculative here, but these are the types of things that we could do, to get maybe a year ahead of time priority review for their drug. That matters to them. It turns into dollars, but what we would require them to do potentially is pre-competitive data sharing, for example, on their drugs.
So can I make a suggestion?
Okay, yeah, please.
So what I would say is you create a public benefit corporation that effectively represents one share for every American who's already been born. And when you do the deal with whoever, VC or PE or whatever it is, you get options and warrants and the right to equity in whatever happens going forward. And rather than just a reimbursement, all of us get to share in the upside.
So I want to pull that thread a little bit, because we've actually been talking with some of our companies that we're negotiating with right now.
I'll come and help you negotiate too if you want.
Let's do it. So, you know, the Public Benefit Corps is a great example of how do we really prioritize making good decisions for public health. And so can we even build that into our contracts? Like, we're at the phase of an agency, while I just told you about these great technical programs, behind the scenes we're doing a lot of experimentation on how do we do business differently with the government?
Good.
And so Public Benefit
I knew I
Corps
liked you.
is one. You might appreciate this one. I've been frustrated coming into this role that we haven't got a lot of ideas from both the community and even our own internal scientists on women's health. And so that's a really underfunded area, underrepresented, but the energy is out there. So it's like, how do we close that gap? So 2 weeks ago, we announced $100 million to catalyze 6 different pieces of women's health.
Good.
The way that we're doing it, and you know, it's this urgent need, right? There's been 100 years of lack of representation at least. And so we're doing very quick 3-pagers, just like we want to see if there's a there, and then we're inviting them for an in-person pitch. And so 30 minutes, we'll know through that process, like, do we want to fund this group or not? What are the gaps? And then begin negotiations there and fund it before the end of the fiscal year, which in government time is like rocket speed,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the details in terms of the economics, right? Because if we walked into Shark Tank and Renee's like, boy, I got this investment and this product's doing this, and we're about to do, eye transplants. We've got all these women's health moonshots that we're doing. The first question we're always going to ask, and I'm representing, let's not call it Shark Tank, it's Taxpayer Tank, right? And the first question I'm asking is, what's in it for us, right? So what is it that we can push, right, through whatever means, so that we're not just getting reimbursed, right? Because if I put on a VC or PE hat, which I've done many times, I think, oh, it's the government. I am going to steal them blind, right? And not that anybody could steal you blind, Renee, but the point being that as a taxpayer, we want to get, we want to get access to the upside. So how do we get shares in the upside?
So,
because those VCs aren't doing it for their health, right?
So this is something that we really care deeply about, and I'll tell you how our structures do things very differently from the rest of the federal government and why we're here to begin with. So one is that our program managers, you can almost think of them as a portfolio manager.
Right.
And we don't issue grants, actually. We only issue contracts or these other transactions. And that means that our program managers have a seat at the table. So nobody's going to rob us blind because we're there with them in their meetings. We're helping them design
But 10 years after, let's just say
our funding is done.
The funding is done.
Okay.
And eyeball transplants are just common, right? Just like LASIK. Hey, you need a new eyeball, just go in here. We'll give you, 20/20 vision, right?
Yeah.
And then we look back and say, oh, the government could have, the government funded this, and all these people are making a fortune, and we're not making a nickel. How do we avoid that?
Well, so I think those are through some of those creative structures. And so what is reach in IP that we can maintain for a while? I'm not sure that Bidol
Why would you ever
is
sell the
perfect.
IP, though? Why not just license it?
Well, totally. The government won't take the IP, right? So using...
They won't? We won't?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Because I don't know that the government is well equipped to do anything with it. By our model, those program managers are term limited. So they're in and they're out. And it's really important to have that champion. I think that sticks with that technology. And for ARPA type investment, that tends to be the folks that you fund. But I would be curious to hear what your ideas would be in that
Yeah,
scenario.
just the same thing, acting like a for-profit or even a nonprofit, right? If a nonprofit invents something, they'll keep the IP and license it so they have an ongoing source of income.
Yeah.
Why not do the same thing? Because holding IP, you just, patent holder, U.S. government, right?
Right.
Shouldn't be hard.
Yeah. I don't think we want, I don't know that it's a good question. And so maybe this is an experiment that we can try. But the problem is just how transient a DARPA or an ARPA or an ARPA-H
Even
is.
so, I mean, like companies come and go and their IP sometimes is there in the patent register and they're not existent anymore. That's okay.
But like sticking it with let's just pull on this. If I would leave and I'm a champion for one of these things, what I would want to be sustainable in the ecosystem is like the launch of a public benefit corporation or the launch of a company that has that IP.
But you see, obviously where I'm going with this, right? I mean, look, some of these deals like that, when you're shooting for moonshots, you need to make a ton of money off of it if it works, right? And if you do, that could, it could make $5 billion, $10 billion, $20 billion, and in the future, $100 billion. That could really help this country in a lot of ways. So if the trade-off is, okay, it's hard for government to retain IP, and there's turnover and people licensing it, and some of them are, or just, okay, so. I'm here to help.
I think thinking about like where, if you want to have an evergreening model like that,
yes,
right? Where the
as a
funds go back
taxpayer,
in
yes,
So like, where would that sit? Where would that ideally sit?
In Mark Cuban, the Department of Mark Cuban IP underneath the federal government. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We invent it all the time in the government, right?
Exploring this.
Yeah,
like,
no, for real.
where
You
should
you
it
create
sit?
a Department of IP, right? It can be, it could, I don't know, I'm not, I don't know how all the intricacies of the government work there, but you just make whatever it is you have to make, and somebody is responsible for licensing. I'm sure somewhere within the government structure we generate, like there's excise taxes that we create, right, where you pay sin taxes or whatever. It can sit there like an excise tax and just charge. I mean, but why wouldn't we? And you would be the ultimate hero, Renee. Who generates, so, income tax receipts up, corporate income tax receipts up, the Renee receipts through the roof, Seriously, I mean, what's the downside?
Yeah. We should do that experiment and see what that looks like
I'm here to do my civic duty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, I mean, literally, with like the NIH should be doing it, you can talk with them. But what you guys are doing is so important and so exciting. That's why I wanted to do this, because the moonshots, when they hit, not only have an impact on public welfare, right? Yeah. Global welfare, right? But now if we start think a little bit differently from a financial perspective, that's how you make up gaps in funding.
So I think one of the challenges, though, is in general, so I've spent time in the private sector and in governments, and if the terms and conditions of working with the government are why would a company work with the government? If
because they see the upside. So if you come to me, right, and you say, okay, we're transplanting eyeballs, we're about 5 years away, and all we want is to keep 73%. I'm like, 27% of a big number is a really big number. I'm like, okay, let's go. No one's going to say no, because you're doing all the hard work, because I don't have to invest in your losers.
Yeah.
I get to see your winners, and and that's what, that's why there's Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D, Series E, Series F, and every step along the way you get to see more and more progress. I think no one's going to say no. Nobody. Okay, so let me put another hat on. I'm negotiating with the government. This is the way they do things all the time. No, I wouldn't do that. You have to do it exactly the way I like. No. That's where you bring me in.
No, I mean, it genuinely is. We want to bolster a business as well and have them grow. So I hear you. I do think there's a continuum of business models and experiments. It's not one size fits all. It's not all your IP goes to the government either. I disagree with that.
Why?
Why? Because I mean, there's not the expertise to really maintain those right now. Maybe we could build.
Maintaining what though, right? Because if, back in the day when we started AudioNet, which was the first streaming company, and before that I did a lot of custom software, and we really didn't patent things back then. Like Apple didn't, the first 20 years of Apple's life or whatever it was, they didn't have 2 patents in total. Yeah. I wish I had, because all the stuff we had done for streaming, if I had patented, I might be rich today, But the point is that it's not hard, right? There's nothing, I mean, just being able to retain a licensing fee or the...
Yeah, I think it's worth an experiment. I totally agree with
there's
you.
no reason not to.
Yeah.
No reason not to. Damn, I might have to get into politics.
Being a public servant, there's a lot of, I think, good to that. And that's actually like one of the things for this audience too. There's really different ways to serve your country. And I like, what an honor it has been for me in this role to have, I get to do this job, right? I get to have levers in the federal government to, maybe potentially hold IP, but to reimburse the FDA, to be able to build structures into projects to make sure that there's a place for curiosity-driven science, but I'm not funding that.
Look, don't get me wrong. I think what you're doing, of all the politicians I've ever talked to, you're not a politician, but within government, this is one of the top 5 most important, right? Because literally you can change the world, and if you just have a 10% hit rate. Yeah. It's insane, right? Okay, we'll switch gears a little bit. I'll beat you up a little bit more on that later. What are you looking for here that the audience can come to you with, to your program managers?
Yeah, so for us, I'm the first director of ARPA-H, and so it's really important to me to lay the DNA of this organization to push the aperture out as far as we can of what an ARPA can do. So I think there's preconceived notions of what ARPAs do, and I just want to break all of those preconceived notions and push further. And like one great example that might resonate with you, our HEROES program, which is not an R&D technology program, but instead it looks at 4 key health outcomes, so opioid use disorder, excessive alcohol use, OB complications after birth, and 10-year cardiac risk. And so these are, if you pick any urban center, rural center around the United States, really bad rates in some areas. However, there are known interventions that if doctors would just do them, they would improve patient outcomes. So how do we incentivize that? We incentivize that a doctor can see as many patients as possible. That's how they're incentivized now. So the HEROES program is actually going to pay for positive health outcomes. So it's a 3-year program, and the end goal being a 20% improvement on health outcomes. ARPA-H will kind of be first in, first out. We're looking for other outcome buyers to put together a prize of $45 million. But in a given region have a catchment that there's a $60 million savings to that area, right? And so what are those new business models? So we're not afraid to try new business models, but just to show, like, hey, this is how we can then create a runway for transition of new interventions, whether they're as simple as having a conversation when you're 40 about your 10-year risk. I know you're not there yet, but all the way to, all the way to whiz-bang new technology. I'm going to implant a new eye, right, and be able to do this. So that's just another great example of the types of things we're trying to do.
It's amazing. What else?
So, one of the things for us is getting things to convincing scale. And so what I've been so impressed with Cost Plus is the scale that you can get to really quickly to get to all Americans. And so what are some of the things maybe that you're seeing in the ecosystem that are maybe demonstrated at a very small level, or if they just got to a greater scale, could really pick up and be adopted? Because that's where we want to fund those catalytic transitions to demonstrate some of those scale.
The biggest inhibitor to changing healthcare in this country is trust, right? And the reason we don't trust the healthcare system is because there's no transparency. And the reason there's no transparency is the biggest buyers of healthcare, corporations that insure 150 million employees, and the government with Medicare and Medicare Advantage, is that we don't ask for it, right? And so the biggest catalyst to change would be for you guys to fund a program inside CMS or outside of CMS to help CMS deal with the question of what is the best business arrangement, if you will, for Medicare Part D, which is prescription medication, and for Medicare Advantage. Because what's happening now is when they negotiate those contracts, they only use the biggest pharmacy benefit managers and insurance companies. They don't use, and none of those will allow any transparency.
Right.
And so putting together test programs where you say, let's use smaller PBMs and smaller and direct contract, if you will, right? Use the Medicare health networks instead of using one of the big insurance companies. What are the outcomes? Because I think at that point in time, that forces the biggest players, the big insurance companies and PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, to change how they do business.
That's right, yeah.
And if you can do that within the government, everything changes.
I mean, you're highlighting exactly what I think our superpowers are, which is to demonstrate some of the things at scale. So the HEROES program that I just mentioned, that program manager was in some of these big payer private sector companies, but had also worked at CMS. And so kind of saw the problem from both sides, and knowing, getting CMS on board with our program, they don't have the authorities to do what we're doing with that program. But if we can demonstrate that it's possible, now we can start to hopefully influence that policy, influence the way that they do business.
Because literally changing healthcare, I mean, if you don't know what Cost Plus Drugs is, costplusdrugs.com, if you go to our website and you put the name of the medication that you take, it'll come up, and hopefully that we carry 2,500 meds, but we'll show you our cost. And then we mark it up 15%, so we'll show you our markup. Then if you buy a mail order, it's shipping and a pharmacy fill fee of $10, or you can now pick it up at a local pharmacy, and we give that same money to the pharmacist. But just that transparency has allowed us to show people how much they're getting ripped off with their prescription medications. And we started shipping January 22nd of 2022, and we've shipped millions of prescriptions now, millions of customers, all in 2 years. In our advertising budget, zero. It's 100% word of mouth because, you know, I just got an email from somebody today. She has leukemia, and she lost her insurance, and CVS was asking her to pay $2,000 a month for this chemotherapy drug called imatinib. And her cost for the strength she needed, including shipping, was $39.99, right? And so those are the types of things we're going. But in terms of how do we grow quickly, one, transparency, because if you go to Cost Plus, you see all of our prices. And two, that leads to trust. Mm-hmm. And so when our prices go down, like if you go on Threads or X, Twitter, every day we're announcing a new price cut. Because when our prices go down because of volume, we pass it on. Yeah. And so how do we have an impact and how do we scale? Transparency, trust. I think in this day and age, because there's so much misinformation, so much social media driven information, the number one product for any company, any governmental organization is trust. Mm-hmm. And the best way to build trust in this day and age is complete transparency, because otherwise you're dependent on somebody else for information. We're just, the kimono is open, so you get to see all of our costs. And so that's been our approach. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, that'll help us continue to scale. But in terms of overall healthcare, with my companies, I didn't realize how stupid I was when it came to buying healthcare. Mm-hmm. Like literally for, you know, my companies, we had 1,000 lives, 700 employees, give or take. And I was paying a consultant $30 per employee per month, $2 million a year. And they were just taking off-the-shelf stuff that we could have done our own. We had an insurance program, and I self-insure, where the insurance company who supposedly was going to, you know, give me these great rates with hospitals and stuff, when we needed an MRI for one of our kids, it was $2,200 through my insurance company that did my companies, or under $500 if I just showed up with a credit card. Mm-hmm. Which is just insane, right? Yeah. And so, you know, being able to introduce transparency across the whole healthcare spectrum makes it easy to change.
Well, and I think that with the emergent kind of AI tidal wave that is coming, it becomes even more important. And so I just like harking back to a little bit of DARPA history, there was a program probably about 10 years ago called explainable AI, right? So how do you, okay, here's a decision, here's a recommendation by your AI bot, but why? Why is it the decision? What is the data that you're building on? And this is a huge gap that we're really trying to address at ARPA-H. So yes, you not only have to be transparent in the data, where you're getting the data, but how are these
but
tools?
Can large language models be transparent?
Well, I think it can. And so I think bringing in the experts to create that transparency and understand the decision making, and importantly, understanding the bias in those systems. And something that struck me when they were pitching explainable AI was there was a series of like thousands of images of, I think it was like a snow fox or something like that. And it was able to, like, you know, 99% accuracy tout this model. But what they were honing in on was actually snow in the background of the picture. Uh-huh. It had nothing to do with the fox. Right. And so then you had these pictures where the fox was absent and it was still saying it was a snow fox. And so it's just like, can you imagine what an EHR looks like in that setting? And so it's those models are so early stage.
And it's going to get worse because the Mayo Clinic is not going to publish all their research. They want to keep it to themselves, and they'll do their own large language model, right? Cleveland Clinic will do their own. Harvard Medical, they'll do their own. And so you're going to have all these AI large language model silos that are going to make it even tougher.
So this is where I want to kind of bring up our ability to maybe use some of those incentives, like encouraging pre-competitive data sharing, because whoever the organization might be, they may silo their data, but those models are so data hungry, those are going to be the folks that are left behind, the people that silo their data. Why not? You don't
because
think so?
They'll be open source of everything else, right? So what Facebook is doing with their open sourcing, I think we'll get more open sourcing. They're building bigger and bigger perimeter-based large language models, right? Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I shouldn't be shaking my head while you're
still talking. You can shake your head. No, I like that, right? The more you disagree, the more we learn, right?
Yeah. So well, I just think like if you did a pie graph of how much of the data is open source and how much of it is proprietary, you know, it's a tiny, tiny little sliver that's open source right now. And so,
but that's what's being used to train everything right now, right? Because
that's my point is that like, how can we get access? And maybe it's I don't know, what does this look like to really get access to all that proprietary?
So if I'm Mayo Clinic and you're Cleveland Clinic, two big time, or MD Anderson, right? Mm-hmm. and I just make that my data available, and you make yours data available, I lose my brand differentiation, right? Because now all of a sudden, I don't need, I can be at, a rural hospital for that matter, and be a doctor there and say, look, everything's in this large language model, and here's, DARPA and ARPA have done, work to say, here's the genealogy, if you will, or etymology of it, and why do we need to go to MD Anderson? They're not going to give that up. On the flip side, I can say, well, okay, DARPA's put together this model, and I can use this thing called mixture of experts, right, where we got different models that we can package together, or RAGs or whatever, and I get the best of both worlds. I'm not going to, if it's me, I'm like any of my IP, I'm not letting you put it in your model. I'll create my own model.
Right.
And if you have to make multiple searches and decide which is the better outcome, so be it.
But I think the IP in those situations is so challenging. How do you set IP when you're using some of these proprietary data or open source data? Who owns the IP ultimately if your data was part of that model building?
Well, I mean, look, if I pay for the doctor or the researcher, it's mine. Right. I mean, just like I want you for ARPA to keep that IP there.
What if we give patients, though, ownership of their data so that it doesn't matter?
Well, that's different types of data, right? That's different types. So, if I'm doing the IP, so let's just say the eyeball transplant isn't at ARPA, right? It's at one of my hospitals. I don't own the hospitals. Let's pretend I did, right? I'm keeping all that IP and I'm monetizing it and I'm using it. I'm making it available to everybody, and hopefully at a cost plus 15%, so it's affordable to everybody. But I ain't giving it to you.
Yep.
And I think, enough people will think like that it's going, so I'm a big believer that there'll be millions of models, and we'll have kind of meta search engines, if you will, that are in front of them to help pull the people, the best of the best, and determine what the best answer is, because then you also have conflict. Your way to transplant an eyeball, my way to transplant an eyeball, which is better, you don't want a large language model deciding that. Yeah. At least not now, maybe in the future.
Yeah. I agree. Not right now. It's got a ways to go. I'm really excited about thinking about new language models, even DNA as a language, right? So there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to all those genetic sentences. And so this is an area that I think the federal government, maybe ARPA-H, is really ripe to try to break that open.
I mean, look at precision medicine, right? I'm a big believer our whole bodies are just one big math equation with what's quadzillions of variables that we can't even quantify. And at some point, we'll figure all those out, right? And how they all connect together. And you'll be able to have, since you're different than me, et cetera, a personalized response to everything. And that's a perfect application for what you guys are doing, because that's far beyond what any one organization can do.
Well, going back to your point about trust, though, how do you build trust with communities to share more of the data? Because we want representation across a lot of different communities. Some of the organizations that you mentioned are, regional and reflect those populations, but that's not America, right?
For sure.
And so, one of the things that is really exciting to me is working with rare disease communities, because those patients actually understand the value and the promise of their data, because sometimes they're one of 1,000 people in the world, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so like the
Which
motivation.
brings up a whole other question with specialty medications that are costing millions of dollars, and how do you pay for them? Look, that's a perfect application for you guys, and anybody out here who has solutions, right, to take to you guys,
absolutely.
for sure. Look, curiosity has got to be the base for everything. And trying to solve the most difficult problems lots of times goes to the government, right? And look at cybersecurity right now. Microsoft announces they have an intruder still inside of Microsoft today, I mean, that's insane when you think about it. And, we saw what happened with Change Healthcare, which just screwed up the entire, pharmacy side of the world. I think we're going to get to the point where we nationalize, if you will, that's the wrong word, cybersecurity. And so those are the applications that you guys need to be taking on.
And we are. So I don't know if you're not tracking we have a program called DigiHeals that just sort of coming from the DARPA community. When I came into healthcare, I was stunned at how far behind healthcare was when it comes to cyber.
Oh my God,
and having been in DOD, where it is, top of the spear, I was like, wow, these two fields could not be more different, but yet the tools exist in defense that we haven't applied in the cyber domain. So DigiHeals, it really looks at everything from ransomware that can shut down rural hospitals, which happens,
Yep.
where then the outcomes for those communities are devastating. You know, it's across all diseases if those hospitals close, but all the way to devices where there's patches that exist, but companies aren't incentivized to patch their devices.
Right.
Or, by the way, the middleman that sends the information is a fax machine still. So a lot of America still uses like literally fax machines. And so you can't just auto update your software.
No, literally, in one of my companies, this week we said you're not allowed to use phones to call each other.
Tell me more.
Because you can spoof people's voices now,
right, yeah.
right? And get them to do things and give information that we don't want to be provided, right? So now we have these YubiKeys on everything, and that's the only way you can send information, because it's you know, I've already seen it. I've seen my voice and my image and videos of me using things that I didn't do, right?
Right.
And it is crazy. And so it's so easy to spoof my voice now that we didn't want people making phone calls.
Right. Yeah. It's wild.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect place of like white space that we can really tackle at ARPA-H.
So how can we learn more?
So we definitely don't have the monopoly on good ideas. So we have an open, broad agency announcement, which is anybody that has a great idea that wants to pitch our agency. That's open for business. So hopefully you'll consider, literally go to our website and there's a link
Which
to.
is?
Thank you. ARPA-H.gov is
ARPA or?
ARPA-H.gov.
ARPA-H.gov.
Yes.
That's easy enough.
Yes.
Did you have to put the dash in there?
You do. I actually don't know what happens if you don't. That's there's another experiment.
Do you own the domain without the dash?
Maybe. I don't know.
See, those are the things. We got to get the government to start
You're
thinking
making me
about.
think of things I hadn't thought of. Now I'm nervous, but yeah, awesome. Great. Well, so what's your next move after Cost Plus? Are you going to do more in the healthcare domain?
Yeah, I mean, Cost Plus is medications, and we're not going to do a Cost Plus healthcare, where we're selling that, but we are going to start the things that I'm doing for my companies that are different than what we did before in healthcare in terms of direct contracting for care. And I'll say this again, no matter what insurance you have or if you don't have insurance, before you go to your insurance company for any type of healthcare or medication, right? Call up that same place. Don't tell them, hey, I got insurance. Just call up, if your kid broke an arm and you need to get it set and your deductible is $7,000 and you're under deductible, don't call your insurance company knowing you're going to, they're going to send you somewhere and you're going to have to pay a lot. Call them up and say, hey, I'm a cash payer. What's the price for this? My kid broke their arm. What's the price? I guarantee it's going to be cheaper, which is crazy, right? You would think my insurance company, we did this deal, right? I got through the ACA. This is going to be great. No. Because what happens is when you go and your kid gets their arm set and they send you this crazy bill knowing that it's a deductible, they charge you as much as they can. And the reason is because the hospital takes the responsibility for the accounts receivable, right? So all those deductibles that people have, it's not the insurance company that makes them whole, makes the hospital whole if the deductible isn't paid. So if somebody goes to the hospital, they fix your kid's arm, they give you a credit card, the credit card, goes through, or you can't pay, or they will bill you because it's an emergency. 60% of those bills don't get paid. So they have to jack up the price to compensate for that. But if you go in as a cash payer, that risk is gone, so they'll cut the price significantly.
Any last words? I hope that we can have this conversation again in 25 years, looking back at the way DARPA.
I hope I can have this conversation in 25 years.
We're both still healthy. We sparked the internet and stealth technology from DARPA. And so I hope some of these investments
I think this is great. I mean, my final word is yes.
Awesome.
Just let me help you on contracting. Because they're literally the most, what you're doing in terms of eyeballs and everything is insane, right? But the greatest impact would be making taxpayers shareholders. Yeah. And if you make taxpayers shareholders, you have changed everything for everybody in every which way.
Well, our PMs, our program managers are coming in April to Dallas, so
I'm
maybe you
easy
can
to
come
find.
sit down
Yeah, I'm easy to
and
find.
let's experiment. Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Mark.